The mist spreads over the deserted beach. The wind blows strongly, carrying the smell of death and plague. Before him, wrapped in a black cloak, stands the inevitable figure. The knight knows that his time has come, but he doesn't accept it. He proposes a game. A chessboard appears between the two. The rule is simple. As long as the game lasts, he stays alive. This is one of the most iconic scenes in movie history. The Seventh Seal, directed by Ingmar Bergman, is not just a movie about a medieval knight facing the Black Death. It's a movie about all of us, because we're all playing the same game. We live our lives as if we had control, as if we had time, as if the answer to the great mysteries of existence lay just ahead. But death always waits. And in the end, nobody wins that game. But before the game is over, a question haunts the knight. What is the point of all this? If the only certainty in life is death, what are we doing here? Is there a greater purpose? Or is it all just a big void? The horror he feels when facing these questions is what the philosopher Albert Camus called the absurd. The clash between our need to find meaning and the total indifference of the universe. And this absurdity is not just an abstract philosophical question. We feel it all the time. When we work for years to achieve a goal, and when we get there, we realize that we still feel empty. When we make detailed plans for the future and everything falls apart without warning. When we're told that all we have to do is follow the right rules to be happy, but something still seems to be missing. It's as if life were a maze with no way out, a game with no clear rules, a cosmic joke with no punchline. The knight wants to believe. He wants an answer. But what if there isn't one? What if life is just a game without a greater purpose, without a grand ending, without a secret to be revealed? Perhaps this is the greatest truth that we avoid seeing. But if that's the case, how can we go on living? The question is not just whether there is a meaning to existence, but what we do when we discover that there may not be. If there is no greater plan, who sets the rules of the game? If nothing has an absolute meaning, where do we find purpose? If there are no certainties, how do we deal with the fear of emptiness? The knight still has a few pieces left on the board, and so do we. The question is, how do we play this game? The knight continues his journey through a devastated world. He looks around and sees people dying for no apparent reason, desperately praying for salvation, mutilating their own bodies in search of redemption. He sees a young woman being burned at the stake, accused of witchcraft. Her only crime? Being born at the wrong time, in the wrong place, in the middle of chaos. He tries to find an explanation, something that makes sense, but all he gets is silence. This is the essence of the absurd, as Albert Camus defined it. Human beings spend their lives searching for meaning, believing that there is an order, a justice, a higher logic that guides everything. But the world doesn't reciprocate this search. The universe doesn't respond. And this is the greatest frustration of our existence. Ever since we were children, we've been taught that life follows a predictable script. If we are good, we will be rewarded. If we work hard, we'll succeed. If we make the right choices, everything will work out in the end. But then we grow up and realize that there are no rules. Good people suffer tragedies. Tireless workers die in poverty. True loves end without explanation. Chance decides our fate more than any plan or effort. This feeling that life doesn't play by our rules is not unique to Bergman's Knight. It is present in all of us, at every moment in history. Think of a soldier who goes to war believing he is fighting for a just cause, but dies without ever understanding the real reason for that conflict. Think of a worker who dedicates decades of his life to a company, believing that he will be rewarded, only to be discarded at the first cost cut. Think of someone who finds the love of their life, only to lose that person to an accident, illness, or simply time. Reality doesn't care what we think should happen. This frustration is exactly what Camus describes as the absurd, the clash between our need for meaning and the total indifference of the universe. And the most common reaction to the absurd is revolt. How many times have we said, "That's not fair," as if there was someone to listen, someone to right the wrong, to ensure that life works the right way? But there is no one. The universe is not a moral court. It doesn't hand out rewards and punishments. It just exists. And that idea is hopeless. The knight realizes this with every step he takes. The people around him have no answers. Some seek comfort in religion. Others give in to despair. Others just try to survive without thinking too much. But none of them has the answer he wants. And perhaps this is the hardest truth to accept. There is no answer waiting for us. The absurd is not just a philosophical idea. It's a feeling we've all faced at some point. That moment when we ask ourselves, why is this happening to me? Why is life like this? Why does nothing make sense? And if everything is so chaotic, if the world offers us no answers, what do we do now? If life has no meaning on its own, can we create one? If the universe is indifferent, can we learn to live anyway? The knight continues his journey. The game isn't over yet. Is this content making you reflect and sparking new ways of thinking? If so, click the super thanks button just below the video. It's a way to say thank you and help me bring more content like this to those who need to reflect on life. The knight arrives in a village where fear has taken over everything. People march in processions, singing hymns, and asking forgiveness for sins they don't know they've committed. Some punish themselves physically, believing that with pain and sacrifice, they can find redemption. Further on, a young woman is surrounded by a crowd. They are convinced that her presence has brought evil to the city. The knight watches in silence. He wants to believe that there is a greater truth, a purpose for so much suffering. But the scene before him reveals something disturbing. Religion can offer comfort, but it can also imprison. Since the dawn of humanity, whenever the absurd became unbearable, people sought refuge in faith. When we can't find logic in existence, we create stories to fill it. Why are we here? Because we were created by a higher power. Why do we suffer? Because we are being tested. What happens after death? Paradise, reincarnation, anything as long as it's not emptiness. And for centuries, these answers have given people strength. They have created civilizations, consolidated kingdoms, and helped entire societies through difficult times. But at the same time, this search for meaning has also led to fear, persecution, and intolerance. The Knight of the Seventh Seal knows this. He has fought in battles believing he was fulfilling a sacred mission, only to return and see that the faith that guided him also led to suffering. He still wants to believe, but he can't ignore the doubt. And that doubt is dangerous, because faith has a unique power. It doesn't need to be proven, only felt. Camus saw it as an escape. For him, believing in a greater plan was a way of denying the absurd, of avoiding facing reality as it is. After all, if everything is part of a higher purpose, then suffering ceases to be a problem, and we accept it without question. And when something can't be questioned, it can be used to justify anything. In the movie, this is evident. People who punish themselves believe it makes them purer. The crowd that condemns the young woman believes that they are protecting themselves. But not everyone gets carried away. The Knight Squire, a skeptical man with no illusions, watches everything with contempt. For him, faith can be an instrument of manipulation. This world is hell, he says, and man always finds a pretext to make it worse. And that's where the big question arises. What's worse? Living in the despair of finding no meaning or believing in something illusory in order to feel safe? The knight continues his journey. He still doesn't know whether he believes or not, but he realizes that, regardless of the answer, life goes on. The game isn't over yet. But if religion doesn't give us certainty, and if the universe doesn't offer us meaning, what's left? Perhaps the answer lies not in seeking meaning in something greater, but in learning to live within the absurd itself. And that's exactly what we'll talk about in the next chapter. The knight continues his journey, increasingly restless. He wants to believe that there is a purpose to everything, that his quest will lead him to a greater revelation. But with each step, he realizes that his questions fall into a void. His squire, on the other hand, seems to see reality in a completely different way. He's not looking for answers. He doesn't expect meaning. He just goes on, living one day at a time, laughing at the madness of the world, and accepting whatever comes. And this is exactly what Camus would call the hero of the absurd. Because if the universe doesn't make sense to us, if no higher power guides us, if all the answers we seek are just echoes within our own minds, how can we go on living without going mad? Camus proposes that there are three ways. The first is to cling to a comforting illusion, the belief in a greater meaning, even without proof. But, as we have seen, this choice can blind us to reality and make us prisoners of a promise that may never be fulfilled. The second is to give up the game, to accept that life is absurd, and surrender to despair, nihilism, and total apathy. But that's just another form of imprisonment, because living without desire and action is the same as not living at all. Then there is the third path, the path of the hero of the absurd. Here, Camus presents us with Sisyphus. Imagine a lonely man in front of a mountain. He places his hands on a huge rock and begins to push it uphill. He feels the crushing weight. His muscles tremble, sweat drips down his face. Every meter gained requires an immense effort. And when he finally reaches the top, exhausted, for a brief moment he thinks, "Is it over now?" But no. The rock slips out of his hands and rolls back to where it started. He sighs, walks down and starts again. This is Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to a cruel fate, to repeat this task for all eternity. If there is a more perfect portrait of human despair, this is it. Endless effort without reward, an endless routine, meaningless work. And Camus challenges us with an unexpected question. What if Sisyphus is happy? What if, instead of seeing his task as a punishment, he simply accepted reality and found small joys within it? Because, in the end, that's not very different from what we all do. How many times have we felt trapped in repetitive cycles? We work, we pay bills, we face challenges, we build things that then fall apart, and then we start again. But within that repetition, there are moments of light, little moments of beauty and pleasure that make it all worthwhile. Perhaps Sisyphus, as he descends the mountain to look for his rock, feels the wind on his face and enjoys the moment. Perhaps he finds pleasure in movement, in the challenge, in the simple sensation of being alive. Because even without a greater meaning, there is beauty in the process. Laughter with a friend, the feeling of the sun on your face, the taste of coffee in the morning, a song that plays and for a moment makes everything seem right. The hero of the absurd doesn't wait for life to reveal a great mystery. He doesn't demand answers from the universe. He simply lives, accepting that meaning lies not outside, but within every little experience. That's why the squire in the movie seems lighter than the knight. He doesn't carry the anguish of needing to find an absolute purpose. He just moves on, dealing with what comes. And here, an essential question arises. If living without great meaning is enough, why do we still feel that something is missing? If accepting the absurd is the answer, why can't we just live without questioning it? Perhaps it's because, despite everything, we're still searching for something deeper. The knight continues his journey, but now something has changed. If before he was looking for concrete answers, now he realizes that he may never find them. He wants to believe that there is a purpose to everything, that his search will lead him to a greater revelation. But what if there isn't? What if, in the end, everything is just silence? This uncertainty consumes him. He has seen the horror of the plague, the misery of the innocent, the fanaticism of those who accept any explanation just to relieve their fear. But what torments him is not the cruelty of the world, it's doubt. That same doubt that hits us at the most unexpected moments. Imagine someone who has spent their life following all the rules, believing that if they did everything right, they would be rewarded. They worked hard, raised a family, made sacrifices, believing that everything was leading to a happy outcome. But then something happens. A tragedy, a loss, a collapse that dismantles everything that person has built. And suddenly, the world no longer makes sense. She is faced with a dilemma: keep believing, even without guarantees, or accept that there may never be an answer. This is exactly the dilemma that Kierkegaard described. For him, reason will never give us certainty about what exists beyond what we can see. We can search, question, analyze, but we will never know with absolute certainty whether there is a greater purpose or not. And that brings us face to face with an invisible abyss. The other side represents the definitive truth, peace, the absolute answer to existence. But there is no bridge. There is no safe path, only a leap. The knight is standing in front of this abyss. He wants to believe, but he can't. He wants answers, but all he finds is emptiness. And this dilemma is not his alone. Because deep down, we all live by leaps of faith. When we trust someone without knowing if we'll be betrayed. When we follow a dream with no guarantee that it will work out. When we choose love, even though we know that everything can change. When we face life without any certainty about what will come after death. A leap of faith doesn't mean having proof. It means choosing to believe, even without certainty. Kierkegaard saw this as the only way out of doubt. He said that true faith cannot be inherited, taught, or proven. It needs to be a conscious leap, an act of courage in the face of uncertainty. But what if the knight can't jump? What if he is condemned to be eternally trapped between disbelief and hope, unable to choose? The clock is ticking. The game with death is coming to an end, and the big question remains unanswered. If we can never be absolutely sure of anything, how should we live? Perhaps the answer lies in changing the focus of the question. The knight is on his way to his final destination. He hasn't found God. He has found no answers. Just more questions, more uncertainty. But something has changed inside him. If there is no meaning imposed by the universe, does that mean we are condemned to emptiness or free to create our own meaning? That's the answer Camus proposes. If the world doesn't give us a purpose, then it's up to us to create it. But how? How can anyone find meaning knowing that in the end, everything disappears? Nietzsche said that the death of God was not just an end, but an opportunity for humanity to reinvent itself. If there is no higher force guiding our lives, then it is we who must take on that responsibility. He called this ideal Superman, a being who doesn't look outside himself for meaning, but who creates his own values, his own art, his own purpose. And this idea is not just philosophical, it's practical. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something surprising. Even in the face of the worst possible suffering, those who found a meaning to continue living were more likely to survive. That meaning didn't have to be something grandiose. It could be the desire to see a loved one again, to finish an important job, to help someone else. He called this vision logotherapy, the idea that the meaning of life is not something universal, but something that each of us constructs for ourselves. And maybe that's the answer. There is no single meaning to existence, but we can find purpose in simple moments, in small things, in daily decisions. Think of an artist who paints without the intention of selling his work. He paints because the act of creating is, in itself, a reason to live. Think of someone who dedicates their life to helping others, not because they expect a reward, but because they feel it gives meaning to their existence. Think of a writer who knows that his words may one day be forgotten, but still writes because that's how he finds meaning. If life has no fixed meaning, we can treat it as a work of art in the making. We don't follow a predetermined script. We create our own story. This is what distinguishes those who accept the absurd as a burden from those who transform it into freedom. When we stop looking for definitive answers, we can simply live. In the film, the knight realizes this too late. His game with death is coming to an end. But for a brief moment, he observes a couple of traveling artists and their young son. They are not worried about death or the meaning of life. They just exist, enjoying what they have. And for a moment, the knight feels peace. If there is no greater plan, the only thing we can do is choose how to live the time we have. But can we really accept that idea? Are we prepared to abandon the search for definitive answers? That's the last piece of the game, and that's exactly what we'll talk about in the conclusion. The game is over. The knight and his companions are taken away by death. There have been no great revelations. No truth was whispered in his ear in the last moments. No divine hand has descended from the heavens to offer him answers. And perhaps this is the answer. Since the beginning of this journey, we've explored the feeling that the world doesn't care about our quests, that our deepest questions often fall flat. We saw how religion can offer comfort, but can also imprison when accepted without question. We talked about Camus's absurd, and how faced with an indifferent universe, we can learn to create our own meaning. And we reflect on Kierkegaard and his leap of faith. That human need to find something beyond, even without certainties. Now, if you've been waiting for a definitive answer to emerge at the end, I have to be honest, there isn't one. But perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all. From the very beginning, our lives are built on uncertainty. When we love, we have no guarantee that it will last. When we follow a dream, we don't know for sure that it will work out. When we trust someone, we don't know if we'll be betrayed. But we keep going anyway. Maybe that's what life is all about. Moving on despite doubts. And that reminds me of a story. It is said that a wise man was sitting by a river when an anguished young man came to ask him, "Master, what is the meaning of life?" The sage smiled and asked the young man to observe the river. See how it follows its path without question. It doesn't ask permission to flow. It doesn't worry about what's around the bend. It simply follows, accepting every stone, every detour, every moment. The young man remained silent. The sage continued, "The meaning of life is not something you find, but something you create, just as the river carves its own path over time." Maybe that's it. Perhaps we are here not to search for a hidden meaning, but to live so intensely that the very act of living becomes our meaning. But there's something I can't ignore. After everything we've talked about, all the reflections on the absurd, doubt, the search for purpose, I don't think we're alone. And I know that's a dangerous statement, because you may have spent the whole video waiting for me to say that there is nothing beyond, that the universe is cold, that there is no purpose, that everything is empty. But I can't look at existence and believe that. I don't know if it's God, if it's the universe, if it's just the way everything connects. But there are moments in life that make you feel that there is something bigger, an unlikely coincidence, an encounter that changes everything, that feeling of being in the right place at the right time. And I know that science can tell us that these are just patterns created by our brains, that we're trying to make sense of the chaos, that it's all just a comforting illusion. But what if it is? If illusion brings us meaning, gives us direction, makes us live more intensely, then maybe that's the answer. Maybe we don't need an absolute truth. Perhaps we can simply choose the truth that keeps us moving. What I do know is this: you are not alone. Because even if it's all a fluke, we're here now, together, pondering the same questions, feeling the same anguish, looking for the same answers. And if that isn't proof that there is something greater that connects us, then perhaps nothing else is. The knight is gone, but his game was not in vain. He spent his life searching for meaning, but in the end, he found something even more valuable. The understanding that it's not the answer that matters, but the way we choose to play. And now, I ask you, what has been your game so far? Have you been waiting for an external answer, for some great meaning to come from outside? Or have you been the creator of your own story? If this video made you think, let me know in the comments. What struck you most? What has changed your outlook on life? And remember, knowledge is the path to true freedom. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.